UU fellowships. I used to belong to SCUF.
Oh.
Anyway, thanks for having me here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the second principle today, right? Who knows the second principle? Anybody?
That one.
Yeah,
After the first one.
Oh, was it up there? Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, so justice, equity, and compassion for all. Yep, that's it, and that's what universal health care is all about. So I like to share, I have a Christian upbringing, so I like to share a story that really resonated with me since I was a kid, and that's the story of the Good Samaritan. Regardless of what faith tradition or lack of faith tradition you were brought up in, you must have heard of the Good Samaritan hospitals and the story of the Good Samaritan. I want to talk about this because I want to talk about what it means to me, which is not always the message that's sent across. So here's the way it goes. Jesus is on the road to Jerusalem, and he meets a Pharisee. So a Pharisee is like a legal scholar, a legal expert, who's so good at memorizing the law that they become elevated in the community and sort of separated from everybody else. Not coincidentally, Pharisee means, it comes from the Aramaic word meaning separation, or to separate. So I just keep that in mind as we go on with the story. So the Pharisee challenges Jesus and he says, "So, teacher, tell us, how do we achieve eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Well, Mr. Scholar, you tell me, what does the law say?" And so the scholar says, it's to love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your body, your bodily strength. And Jesus says, that's it. Now go and do it, and you will never know death. So the Pharisee, not to be outdone, says, "Well, tell me, Jesus, who is my..." Oh, I'm sorry, the second part. I forgot the second part. That's kind of important.
Yes.
The second part is, "And love thy neighbor as thyself," basically. And of course, we all know that part is a golden rule, and it's not specific to Christianity, obviously. But anyway, so do that, he says, and you will never know death. So, as I said, the scholar had to outdo Jesus, so he asked another question. He says, "Okay, so who's my neighbor?" And Jesus says, kind of thinks, he thinks, wow, this guy really needs a little basic education. Didn't you get the first part? So he tells me the story of the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan is a guy from, not surprisingly, Samaria, which was different than Judea, which is where the Israelites were, the Jerusalem-centered part of the Jewish religion. And he says, well, the Samaritan was walking around along the road, and he sees a person who's gravely wounded. He's been beat up by robbers, and he's bloody and laying on the side of the road. And while he's there, a priest walks by and skirts around him, because in the traditional Jewish religion, if you're a priest, you cannot touch blood, or you're ritually impure, and you can't appear in the temple that week. It takes a week or two to cleanse yourself. I forget exactly, excuse me. So, and then one of the church or the temple functionaries walks by and does the same thing. Well, the Samaritan, all he sees is somebody in need. So he proceeds to bind his wounds, pour a little oil on him, put him on his own donkey or horse, I forget what it was, and take him to the nearest inn, where he paid the innkeeper to keep him until he could get up on his own and watch after him, give him his meals and whatnot. And then he said, I'll be back in a couple of days to check on him. Well, gee whiz, what does that sound like? It kind of sounds like what a healthcare system's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to do that. So anyway, Jesus says, well, tell me, of the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan, who was being the good neighbor? What's the answer? The Good Samaritan. Right, so what are the messages of this? What was he trying to teach the Pharisee in particular? There was no doubt that we were all supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, a golden rule. It seems self-explanatory to a moral person. But, so what was he demonstrating with this story? He was, I'll answer it if nobody's going to shout out the answer. He was saying, hey, that's great, you get what you're supposed to do, and if you do that, you're going to go to heaven, but, you're not doing it. What is he doing? He's separating himself from other people. He's saying, he's asking the question, who's worthy? He didn't get it, right? So he told him that story so I'd understand. Here's a guy that the people from Judea thought was, not as good as him, and not worthy because they didn't believe the right things. And so he said it doesn't matter. Everybody's your brother. So the lesson I took from this is that it's my responsibility to care for people whether I know them or not, whether I like them or not. It's not my job to decide if they're worthy. This is what we're supposed to do. So that's what got me involved in this kind of work. So why do I tell that story? I said I was going to talk about the second principle, right? The second principle, I looked at it several times and go, wait a minute. It says justice, equity, and compassion, right? Those are all, justice is a concept, equity is a concept. Compassion is something we're all supposed to feel, but where's the do something? Justice is not something that exists on its own, right? And we see injustice all the time, so obviously, Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I would say it doesn't exist anywhere. How can only some people get justice? If everybody doesn't get justice, it's not a just system, right? So I don't have to explain that to you guys, but I do want to reemphasize the part about doing something, and that's why I'm here. Let's see, I'm looking around for familiar faces, and I'm thinking maybe Mark is somebody I've met before. He's been working on this for quite a while. Mark, were you a member of Healthcare for All Oregon when there was an active chapter here?
No, I was in California.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for coming up here. We need more people like you in Oregon. So there was a very active chapter here. Was anybody involved with that? Do you remember? 2008, 2009, 2010? I'm not sure how long it went on.
Most of us didn't live here then.
Oh, is that right?
I know David
Well,
and April. David and April probably were. David and April Dumas.
Oh, uh-huh.
Oh, okay. So you at least remember it was going on. They tried to pass a resolution in city council.
Oh, really?
Got lots and lots of signatures.
Ruth has her hand up.
Well, Stu Henderson on the front here.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
So if you know Stu Henderson, he was a real leader in that and a number of other causes here. And that's why I'm kind of familiar with what was going on in here at the time. That's when I lived in Coos Bay. And I was coming up here to do what I could to help the movement. So anyway, what was I gonna say next? I had this all planned out in my head. But, so anyway, yeah, so Healthcare for All Oregon is still doing this kind of work. And usually the way I start out these talks, if I'm not talking to a faith community, is I say, does anybody here need to have it explained to them why we have a crisis in healthcare right now? If you pay premiums, you know part of the story. There's no cost controls and they're going up way faster than inflation. And does anybody here take, algebra? Remember exponential growth? What happens eventually? All of a sudden it shoots up to infinity, and that's what's happening to cost. At some point, it's unsustainable. So one of the problems is cost. And by the way, we'd already be there, and we know that if it wasn't for Obamacare. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, because despite the good it did insure more people, especially under Medicaid. But it didn't challenge the system, and the system itself is unjust. The system is based on profit instead of taking care of people. So that's really the basic problem, and that's what's driving prices up. Because how do corporations work? How do CEOs get their pay? They have to keep driving up the value of the stocks, right? Well, think about it. If fewer and fewer people can afford it, fewer and fewer people are going to buy it next year. So they have to raise the prices to keep their stock going up, right? That's how capitalism works. Oops, there's the dirty word. Aren't supposed to challenge capitalism. I hope there's no diehard capitalists here. Not to say it's purely evil. Very few things are. But anyway, so the cost is one of the reasons for the crisis, and the other reason is what? Anybody here know somebody who couldn't get access to health care?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I'll bet most of you do, even if you don't know it. You know, people don't like to talk about that. We're raised to think that we're supposed to take care of ourselves. Well, how are you supposed to do that if you get bone cancer? Can you guys pay for one person who gets bone cancer, all of you together, if you pool everything you own? Probably not. Not everything you own, but everything you have to spend. Probably not. You know, we can't pay for it like that. We have to take the entire population and everybody pays something, so there's enough money in the system to pay for everybody. People like to say, oh, you can't do that. Well, duh. Look at any other country in the world, any other developed country, because they all do it. And there's lots of ways to do it, but the most efficient way to do it is to have a single payer system. Another term that you're supposed to avoid when you talk about this stuff. All that means is that the money goes through one source at some point. And generally speaking, that's a government. Like Medicare, right? Like the VA. Which, by the way, they're trying to privatize right now. I don't know if you guys know about that, but if you want, we can talk about that afterward in coffee hour. But yeah, so there's a crisis of access because fewer and fewer people can afford it, right? That's why Obamacare poured, gosh, I don't know, billions? Actually, I never looked up the number. Tons of money, tons of tax money into expanding Medicaid, which is also becoming increasingly privatized. You guys know that from Trillium. Oh, you're too new to know about Trillium, never mind. The Trillium was the administrator of the Medicaid system in Wayne County, and it was private. And when they decided to disband, they walked away with millions of dollars for their owners. So it was a kind of a scandal, except it was totally legal. That's the way our system works, right? So anyway. So people did get access, but it cost a ton of money for the Medicaid expansion, going into private pockets increasingly, and for subsidizing purchase of private health care. And even though supposedly it covered anybody that couldn't afford to do it on their own, we all know that's not true, right? I mean, because everybody has different things they have to pay for besides health care. So if you're unlucky enough not to have the spare cash to pay for your bills, you're one of the people who, you may be one of the people who goes bankrupt from medical bills, right? 60% of Americans, presumably Oregonians too, go bankrupt because or who go bankrupt do so because of medical bills. So that's a number that's been increasing too, clearly, and that's going to continue to happen. So, you know, we had a problem during COVID. Providers weren't making enough money out of the system because they weren't paid just to provide the service. They were paid on the basis of how much medical care they provided. And so we gave them tons of subsidies. And let's see, what else did we do? Oh yeah, they talked about expanding Medicaid again. Right? They did expand Medicaid, and they talked about increasing subsidies. If they don't continue to do that, the system will collapse. Why are we protecting a system that leaves 30 million, still 30 million, without any insurance, and probably at least that many who either can't afford to use it, or can still go bankrupt if they get sick enough or get a serious injury. So, okay, I hope I've convinced you. There's a real crisis, and it's going to get worse if we don't do something. And I don't think I have to point out, we can't trust Congress to do this on their own. They've had every opportunity to do it, and administration after administration has tried to keep any discussion from it in the public, from the public. When is the last time, including during the so-called healthcare reform debate in 2009, when is the last time you read about single payer? Which I guess I should say is a publicly funded system of universal health care. Ever? Anybody? Me neither. Not in the mainstream media.
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. That's right. The blip in history. Anybody know why Bernie Sanders was a viable candidate? No other person as progressive as him would have gotten any attention at all. Why did he get so much attention? Because he was so well known. Most senators are not that well known, but he was on Tom Hartman every Friday, and 3 million people listen to that show every week. So there's not anybody else who has that kind of name recognition to be a viable presidential candidate. That's why I say blip in history. I'm not disrespecting Bernie Sanders whatsoever. But a president can't do it anyway. It's about Congress, right? How do you get Congress to move? The people got to stand up, right? Well, the people in Oregon can't do it by themselves, but what we can do is establish a state system of single payer. And we're working really hard at that, and Healthcare for All Oregon's been at the center of that. How many people here have signed up for news from Healthcare for All Oregon monthly bulletin? How many people? Oh, good, I got a great audience here. I've got a sign-up sheet out there. And I hope that all these nodding heads will sign up for it. So you can follow what we're doing and see what you can do to help. So, what have we done? Oh my gosh. I've been involved since about 2012. Actually, I was involved before that. That's when they really, Healthcare for All Oregon got started in its current form. But before that, actually, the same people got the legislature to pass what they call a memorial. It's like a resolution, saying that it was the legislature's intent to establish a universal healthcare system in Oregon. And we kept working and we kept working, and eventually we said, well, if we're going to do this, we have to have a study showing that it's going to save money. So we got the legislature to pass a resolution saying, or authorizing the formation of such a study. Oh, I'm going to ask you, if you're going to do that here, please write legibly or it's not helpful. Thank you. And fill out everything that our system requires that, but we won't harass you. I will just send you a monthly email, send you a mailer once a year, and probably never call you. So anyway, so the next thing we did was to get them to authorize the study. And then the following year, we got them to pay for that. You know, it's a hard job making this stuff happen. Well, several years after that, we got the, do you guys remember, some of you been here long enough to remember the vote on House Bill 770, authorizing a task force to study how a universal health care system would work and how it would be paid for? None of you. That's why you need to sign up, okay? Because they did establish that. The committee finished its work last September and submitted a report. And I've got a handout that details what the recommendations were, but you can imagine what some of them were. I mean, it's an equitable system. Everybody has access, anybody that lives in Oregon. There's no payment at point of service, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I don't want to go through the list. It's pretty obvious if you understand how a fair system is supposed to work. They didn't figure out exactly how it would be paid for, other than to say it would be a combination of payroll taxes and personal taxes, income taxes. And the way that's gonna work, the way that's divvied up between different income groups and whatnot, different size businesses, has yet to be worked out. But we wanna do that as fairly as possible. But to work that out, now we need to create something called the Universal Health Plan Governing Board. And there's legislation right now in the state legislature to do that. Well, its job would be to finish coming up with a detailed plan for how this would work, so that they could actually write legislation to do that. And then to figure out exactly how to administer that by coming up with the administrative rules by which any program, state or federal program, operates. So we're getting pretty close when you think about, we started out when nobody would talk about this in the press. Oh, and by the way, they're still not talking about it in the press. Although occasionally, nowadays, there are in local and statewide press. We are getting this. And did I mention that they're doing this all over the country? There's an organization called One Pair States, which is, has representatives from groups like Healthcare for All Oregon, all across the country. I can't remember how many states are doing this now, but I think it's in the 30s. So it's a pretty big movement, and the president of that organization and the secretary live in Oregon. The president just moved here. They're both quite well known nationally in the movement. If we ever got any, when we get more press, they're going to be much better known. So anyway, I was going to leave room for questions, and unfortunately I forgot to make a note of when we started. How long have I been talking?
You got a couple minutes.
A couple minutes?
Sure, a couple minutes for questions.
Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Somewhere I read in the last year that 1/3 of everything we spend for healthcare actually goes to the insurance companies for their administration, or to the hospitals for fooling with how to file for all, anyways, insurance costs. Is that anywhere near true?
That is a fact. Yeah, studies have shown that. That's an average. I mean, some providers are a little bit more efficient. There isn't a whole lot of variation in how much profit insurance companies take, though. So, yeah, the majority of that is due to inefficiencies. Actually, I forgot to mention one thing, and that is that as part of the task force work, they got an actuarial company to estimate how much that we would save in a system like this. They estimated it would be almost $1 billion in the first year.
Just for Oregon?
Just for Oregon.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that's because of the efficiencies. You would avoid all that stuff. You wouldn't save a total of 30%. But that's actually a conservative estimate. Some of the people on the task force thought that we could get the cost of administration down to 4% at least. Medicare's 2%, but the estimate they used 6%. So we probably could save well over $1 billion. And a good portion of it, excuse me, and a good portion of that money they recommend to go to expanding mental health services.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
That's a real crisis in Oregon and across the country. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Very good point. Yes?
You mentioned that, was it the Florence City Council that tried to pass some, bill, or I'm not familiar with how that turned out.
Well, not a bill, but a resolution. And because none of you are here, I'm going to say, yes, that's a fact. None of you were here at the time. Now I'm thinking that may have, they also, Stu and a bunch of his friends also tried to pass a resolution calling for a constitutional amendment that would declare that corporations aren't people, and that the government has a duty, really, to regulate campaign finance. That's how we're going to get people who will do this at a national level. And thank God we still have decent people at the state level who do the right thing for us. That's one of the main reasons we're working at the state level. But I believe they did, Mark.
It passed.
No, I believe they tried to, and I don't think it passed. I don't know what the city council's like now, but at the time it was pretty conservative.
Don't look at me.
Should we try again? Are you on the city council?
She's the lone voice
is.
of reason.
Well, you know
Oh,
something?
one more now. Oh, okay.
Let me tell you something though, it's still well worth doing, even if you know it won't pass. Why? The last time I checked, the Sayus Law News will still publish an article on what's going on in city council. And how many people watch that online? I know where I've lived, a lot of people watch it online. There may not be that many people in the chambers. And another thing, if a bunch of you show up with red shirts and some of you have a Healthcare for All Oregon shirt, they'll know you're all together. And if a bunch of you speak up in favor of it, then the town's gonna realize, you know, this is a thing. This isn't just a couple of nuts. Your bleeding heart liberal city councilor's crazy idea that you thought of all by yourself. No, that's the kind of thing that you can get out and do. And there's lots of things you can do. Just signing up for our list is it's the simplest thing you can do, but it's important because it keeps you informed about what we're doing and what you can do to help. And it also says there you're another person that's standing up for this. And I'd encourage you to, there's choices about how you can sign up. There's as a general citizen, as a business person, which is a key constituency, or as a person of faith. So I do choose person of faith. I will warn you that eventually you will probably start getting one extra email a month, because I want to start a bulletin especially for people of faith with targeted messaging. So I'd really appreciate it if you did that. I didn't talk about the Faith Caucus. Give me 2 more minutes. I forgot to mention what the Faith Caucus, I really need to start writing an outline.
You've got about 2 minutes, okay?
Okay.
We'd like to.
I will,
as close to
I
11 as
understand.
possible.
I understand. Anyway, so the Faith Caucus is reaching out to faith communities all around the state. And our big goal is to get different congregations to vote to become members or endorsers. So we can talk more about that if anybody's interested. The other thing is I'm trying to get people that I can keep in communication with to encourage you to keep things going in the congregation. So if anybody wants to volunteer for that, let me know. The Faith Caucus has over 30 members right now representing many different faiths. There's several UUs. That's why I like to go to UU. That's the other reason I like to go to UU, is because they tend to join, or at least get involved. And so we do outreach and mobilization and education. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any other questions, I'll be in the coffee hour. Thanks.
Yeah, good message. Thank you. And I think Don was passing these out. There's more handouts back there if you'd like to avail yourself of them. And no more handouts. Okay, Don gave them all out. So good for you. So thank you. Really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.
And stick around. We may have questions, more questions. So speaking of healthcare,